Afternoon and for making your way to this incredibly important event, recognizing Ecocide, a legal framework to protect nature, communities, and our common future. It's been exceptionally interesting for me over the past 10 days to see how local communities are really centered, front and center, in the negotiations at COP15. So I'm delighted to be here today to host this panel with all of you. We have a robust panel and discussion, so we're going to try to keep to time as best we possibly can. My name is Jessica Sweidan, and I'm the co-founder of Synchronicity Earth and Flourishing Diversity. I'm also an IUCN patron of nature, so I have a number of hats that I wear, and there's probably a few more than that, but I'm delighted to have all of you here. The floor of this event is going to be in English, but we will have some Spanish with some direct translation, so never fear, we've got you covered. And it will also be filmed so that there'll be others that can be watching online. So this wonderful conversation is actually going to be reaching far more people than are actually in this room. So we're delighted about that. The theme that we're going to be focusing on is the power and potential of legal frameworks, and especially recognition of ecocide as a crime, to provide essential protection for nature, our communities, and our common future. Despite the pledges and commitments, and there certainly are many, and we're still working on them, it is proving an uphill struggle to reach global biodiversity targets and to genuinely protect the planet's vital ecosystems and keystone species. Meanwhile, indigenous and local communities who steward the Earth's most biodiverse regions and stand up to protect the living world are frequently persecuted. Recognizing ecocide, severe and either widespread or long-term harm to nature, as a crime at the international level could provide a protective and preventative legal guardrail that is currently missing. It could set an outer boundary to deter and sanction the worst threats and harms of the environment, while reframing and supporting the guardianship of nature. We're particularly privileged to have with us today the Republic of Vanuatu's Minister of Climate Change and Environment, the Honorable Mr. Ralph Regenvanu. The Minister will be providing concluding remarks at the end of the panel on behalf of Vanuatu. And to begin with, we'd like to invite a local land acknowledgement from our Canadian Youth Representative, Amalie Wilkinson, and followed by a blessing from our Amazon leader, Domingo Peas.
Thank you. So is the audio working well? Perfect. So I'd like to start by acknowledging that we're currently on unceded Indigenous land, stolen land. Many First Peoples have shared the land and waterways of Montreal as a homeland, traditional territory, or birthplace of their people since time immemorial. Now this includes, but may not be limited to, because many of the names have likely been lost in colonial histories, the Ganyengehage, the Mohawk of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, the Huron, the Abenaki, and the Anishinaabe. The Ganyengehage Nation are recognized as the custodians of the land and waters on which we gather today, because it's understood that they have a strong historic and ongoing presence in the territory, with two communities bordering Montreal. So the Ganawega and the Gane-Desage. So we call this land Montreal, but traditionally it's also known as Jojage. And it's now where we're gathering to talk about biodiversity protection, to discuss restoration, and to discuss justice. It's important that at the beginning of this dialogue, we're recognizing that it has a violent colonial history, and it also has a violent colonial present, meaning that the violence of the past continue to benefit us on this land. And as we gather here, as we talk about these issues, we are profiting from that historic violence. Let's engage with that critically, and it's okay if that makes us uncomfortable. I myself am not from Montreal. I was born in Vancouver, but my ancestors are non-Indigenous peoples in Canada, and that means that I am directly benefiting from the colonial systems that we have. As we talk about biodiversity loss, and as we talk about ways to move forward, we can learn a lot from the millennia during which Indigenous peoples, like the peoples of Montreal, were able to live in harmony with the land and to have sustainable ways of taking from the land, of surviving in the ecosystems, and of not degrading them to the extent that colonial systems do today. So with that, I will pass it back over to our moderator.
Thank you so much. Domingo?
Bueno, buenas tardes con todos, señor ministro y señores panelistas, señoritas y Jessica.
Good afternoon, everyone. Honorable Minister, all my fellow panelists, Jessica.
Primeramente invito a sentar todos bien, pisar bien, vamos a concentrar,
I invite
vamos a
everyone.
hacer una conexión espiritual,
We're going to do
vamos a abrir la mano todos, así como estoy yo.
we're going to connect with the earth, with your
Antes de
feet.
que yo haga oración en Achuar, quisiera que inhalemos profundamente, sostenemos ahí y soltamos todo, como
Okay.
voy a hacer yo.
I invite everyone to open their hands, put their feet on the ground, connect to nature. I invite you to close your eyes, take a deep breath, and I will speak in Achuar to a blessing. But first, I ask that you inhale deeply and exhale, follow as I do.
Vamos a hacer 3 veces.
3 times.
Cerramos los ojos.
Close our eyes.
Todos sentimos, vamos a concentrar con nuestro mundo espiritual. Nuestros ancestros están aquí.
We are going to close our eyes and connect
Voy a-
deeply with our ancestors who are in the room with us.
Y voy a orar para que nuestro espíritu nos guíe, nuestros ancestros estén con nosotros para bien común.
I'm going to pray so that our ancestors are staying with us and guiding us and allowing us to find our shared common future.
Ia paria rutam hununganam amukakaram amasusam. Ia pachre I nukuchre I uchiri kahingyaro manyenya bukarmana. Yamai kintia hun pengishiram kakaram amasta. Ia chi I apuri I nukuri yamai I umai. Takak minyak pengir pustina wakirnya o kakaram susarta. Mash irondrar vyakach tarimet eins. Mash ikamia iwiaro kahingyaro o kakarmari. Apu namraro tarimet eins iwiakach apu anya onsha. Mash pengishiram ininti susarat tusantsiam. Apachro arutma. Pengishiram indim tusan kakarma sean en gidetahe. Abrimos los ojos, sentamos aquí, estamos presentes aquí.
We open our eyes and we come back to the room and we
Relájense
Present.
todos.
stay present.
Siéntense
relax,
que estamos aquí
and
para
relax.
bien común.
And
Todos vamos a estar concentrados para que toda la actividad que vamos a hacer, sociedad civil, autoridades, indígenas, jóvenes, mujeres, surja, fluya, para que todos tengamos una acción del futuro.
And so we concentrate, we stay present, and we realize that we call forth so that all that flows through us is for the benefit of all mankind, humankind, and all life, and that for the well-being of all of us, and that it flows through us and achieves our aims.
Gracias.
Makate.
I keep finding myself being very emotional at all of these panels. Thank you so much for both of you for creating that absolutely beautiful container for us to proceed with this very important conversation. Okay, law. We got this, we got this. Right, so to give us an overall sense of what the Ecocide Law Initiative is all about, our first speaker is the notorious Jojo Mehta, who co-founded Stop Ecocide in 2017 alongside legal pioneer Polly Higgins, who I have to say I had the pleasure of meeting back in the day, and what a human being. specifically to support making severe harm to nature an international crime. As key spokesperson and executive director of the organization, Jojo has overseen the remarkable growth of the global movement while coordinating between legal developments, diplomatic traction, and public narrative. She's the chair of the charitable Stop Ecocide Foundation, co-hosting today, and was convener of the independent expert panel for the legal definition of ecocide. It's been encouraging to see the growing momentum of the movement calling for the recognition of ecocide, and it would be great to get some background of the origins, key milestones, and how ecocide law could strengthen and support existing laws and underpin the work of so many to protect nature. Thank you, Jojo.
Thank you so much. It's a real pleasure to be here today, and what amazing company to be in. So thank you all so much. I think one of the things that really was brought to mind by that remarkable introduction from Amalie and from Domingo is quite how far our culture has grown apart from the natural living world. And that is one of the biggest, most foundational reasons for which we work on bringing this law into being that will essentially say that mass damage and destruction of the natural living world is not acceptable and actually should be a crime at the international level. And that's what we work on globally, developing support for that across all levels and different areas of society to support that to come about. We aim for it to become, to join the list of international crimes alongside war crimes, genocide, crimes against humanity, and the crime of aggression. Now, this whole growing apart that has happened in the Western tradition, which is now, of course, very dominating the globe, it goes back hundreds of years. And in fact, although we completely understand that there are very specific situations where there are certain actors that need to be held to account, and of course, this crime will help that to happen, that actually the situation we find ourselves in is probably no one living person's fault in any way. It's the logical conclusion of a systemic situation that has been going on for centuries and grown up, where we've grown apart from the world that sustains us. And so what we aim to do by placing ecocide, or the mass harm of nature, alongside the mass harm of people, is to rebalance that and to create a kind of a shift in consciousness, if you like, so that we understand better the balance that is there and that needs to be there between humanity and the world that sustains us. And of course, what that does as well is to provide a kind of foundational piece in the legal structure that can protect the natural world, because there are many environmental laws in place in the world. And if they were all followed, we might well have a very different situation from the one we're in. But because of this deep cultural issue that we have with not taking the damage to nature as seriously as we take damage to people, what we have is a situation where even existing environmental crimes are, I think, the third most profitable category of crime in the world now, and most committed, and it's been growing over recent years. So it's up there on level with something like drug trafficking, for example, but it has nothing like the level of investigation, of enforcement, and all of that. And so putting in place a kind of foundational piece that says the worst harms to nature are crimes and should be named as such, gives a kind of foundational support to all of the environmental laws that are in place, and also gives strength and draws forward all of the amazing people around the world who are working on improving regulation and improving protection in all of these different areas. Now, we've had some really key milestones over the last few years, but particularly in the last year and a half. The movement that is growing around this demand to criminalize the worst harms to nature has really kind of taken off, I suppose, in the last couple of years. And in particular, a very key element has been the legal defining of what ecocide means. And of course, that's the kind of million-dollar question, isn't it, when you're talking to governments and you want to get them all behind this and move it forward at the international level. Now, last year, our foundation convened a group of international lawyers together, 12 lawyers from around the world, with obviously different geographical, cultural backgrounds, ethnicity, gender diversity, but also legal diversity in the sense of their specialisms, international criminal law, public law, human rights law, climate law, but also their ideologies. We had some quite conventional lawyers, and we also had some quite people's lawyers, activist lawyers, if you like. So what that meant is that the drafting project that they engaged in and the definition that emerged from that was a genuine consensus, because all of them had to sacrifice something to reach it. And it emerged as something very concise, the core of it, so concise that it fits on the back of a business card. And it's this: ecocide means unlawful or wanton acts committed with knowledge that there's a substantial likelihood of severe and either widespread or long-term damage to the environment being caused by those acts. All based on established previous treaties in terms of the language, but also very, very clear for anyone to understand. And that definition has made a huge difference. From a few years ago, no governments were known publicly to be talking about ecocide. In fact, Vanuatu was already there discussing at that time. But now, since the landing on the diplomatic table via the voice of this leading Pacific state, Vanuatu, in 2019, we now have a situation, since the emergence of this definition, that there are over 25 countries that are members of the International Criminal Court that are now talking about this at public level, parliament or government level, and more behind the scenes. So this is something that is really growing in terms of momentum. And not only does it create a sort of outer boundary of what is permissible in terms of how we interact with the natural world, but it also, as well as kind of shoring up that body of international law, it also encourages nations and regions to also look at how to bring that law into being in their own areas as well. So actually kind of creating a kind of bridging piece that can potentially carry us forward into a future that treats the natural world in a very different and a much more reciprocal way. And I think that's probably as much as I can fit into this introductory moment.
Thank you so much. I think Ecocide clearly is one of the biggest tools in our toolbox, our collective toolbox of really taking everything we need to do in terms of integrating conservation efforts, but also protecting different communities in the process. And I'm starting to see this shift within the conservation sphere writ large, moving much more to inclusive forms of conservation. And I think Ecocide as a backdrop for all of that, and in the context of where we are right now here in Montreal, is really important. So thank you for that. So our next speakers, Atossa Soltani and Domingo Peas, who we've just heard a little bit from, bring a perspective from the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Initiative, where Atossa is Director of Global Strategy and Domingo is the Indigenous Coordinator. The Sacred Headwaters Initiative, which I highly recommend, is an alliance of 30 indigenous nations in Ecuador and Peru working to permanently protect 86 million hectares. 86 million acres. Okay, I was maybe being a bit ambitious there. Of rainforests in one of the most biological diverse ecosystems on Earth. Atossa is also the founder and board president of Amazon Watch and served as the organization's first executive director for 18 years. In response to the Amazon fires in 2019, Atossa helped co-found Artists for Amazonia to catalyze global action for the Amazon. In recognition for her life's work as rainforest and indigenous rights campaigner, Atossa was named the Hillary Institute's 2013 Global Laureate for Climate Leadership. Atossa is also a member and contributing author to the Science Panel for the Amazon. She's a skilled strategist in media and policy advocacy and movement building, and a firm believer in the power of storytelling to create change. So we have another powerhouse on our panel here. And Domingo Peas Nampichkai is a longtime leader from the Achuar Nation of the Ecuadorian Amazon, serving the country's indigenous movement. Currently, he is Indigenous Coordinator for the Amazon Sacred Headwaters Initiative on behalf of the Confederation of Indigenous Nationalities of the Ecuadorian Amazon, or CONFENAI, representing 11 indigenous nationalities from the Ecuadorian Amazon region. Domingo served as the Director of Communication for the Achuar Indigenous Nation of Ecuador from 2000 to 2003. He's also the founder of the Achuar Indigenous Community Tourism Project of Sharamentsa and served as the vice president of the Konfanai from 1993 to 96. Domingo has also served as the vice president and later president of the Council of Nationalities and Peoples of Ecuador, as a representative of the German foundation Inge Relph. And he is a phenomenal human being who I very much like a lot. So Atossa, we're starting with you.
Oh, we are? Okay. I
What-
was going to ask if we could start with Domingo.
Do you want to start with Domingo?
That would be great.
Okay. So Domingo, we know that there has been strong support from indigenous leaders around the world for the recognition of ecocide. We'd be honored to hear why this is such a natural alignment.
Bueno, con permiso de ustedes, nuevamente saludando a las mujeres sabias que están aquí, también maestros mayores que están aquí honrando con su presencia. Con vuestra venia voy a hablar, permiso por favor.
And I want to just say hello again and greetings and I recognize the women, the elders, the wise women and the elders that are here. It's with your permission that I want to begin speaking.
Eso de ecocidio nosotros hemos apoyado porque desde la historia, desde nuestra vida, desde nuestro ancestro, hemos convivido con la armonía, con la naturaleza.
We support ecocide laws because since the beginning of time, both from our ancestors to today, we have lived in harmony with nature.
Para nosotros es todo lo biodiverso que existe en la madre tierra, en su entorno, son vivos.
For us, everything that exists, all the biodiversity, all life that exists is the forest and everywhere is basically everything is living. It's all alive.
Nuestra sabiduría, nuestro aprendizaje ha sido a través de plantas, a través de animales, a través de los ríos, vientos. Todo eso nos ha enseñado cómo vivir hasta ahora.
Our wisdom comes from our relationship with plants, comes from animals, from the rivers, from the wind, and from all that is alive to show us the way of how to live in harmony with nature.
Justo por eso hemos organizado para defender ese ecosistema, porque en países modernos, ciudades que buscan otro sistema de desarrollo, querían arrasar toda la Amazonía.
And that's why we've organized ourselves to defend the entirety of this bioregion that is so biodiverse and gives us life because this area is faced with huge threats of the outside world that want to destroy it.
Y debo felicitar que nosotros por la lucha con las asambleístas en año 1998, primera vez en Ecuador, se aprobó la ley del derecho de la naturaleza en la Constitución.
And it was with work that we did with the lawmakers of our country that in 2008, 2008, we actually adopted in our Constitution the law for the rights of nature.
Eso está lindo, está escrito lindo, pero lo que falta del ser humano es practicar lo que se escribe.
This is a beautiful law. It's written really well on paper, but what's left to do is make sure it is enforced. It is not currently being enforced.
Entonces yo creo que también es digno de felicitar a algunas mujeres, algunos líderes, lideresas que han encabezado esto de ecocidio.
And that's why I want to congratulate the women especially, but many of you who have been leading the fight for making ecocide a crime.
Nosotros los indígenas somos voceros porque los espíritus de biodiversidad no pueden llegar hasta acá, pero sí sabemos que está este momento con nosotros.
For us, we are voices of biodiversity. We are voices of nature because species that exist in the forest can't come here and speak for themselves. So it's up to us to defend their rights.
Entonces yo quiero recalcar lo que dijo la hermana, que nosotros todos juntos, la semilla tiene que ir brotando Tenemos que ir creciendo entre todos.
And so I want to underscore something that my sister said, which is that we are seeds that need to propagate and grow and continue to regenerate.
Quiero felicitar al ministro. Ese es el trabajo que deben hacer todas las autoridades del mundo. Ellos son nuestros representantes. Ellos deben trabajar con nuestra coordinación.
And I want to congratulate the minister. The work you're doing in Vanuatu is what all governments need to be doing, because you are our elected leaders. You need to represent our will and our interests.
Pero no debemos callar, tenemos que empujar, tenemos que soportar. No es necesario pelear. La pelea siempre perdemos. Es mejor crear esa armonía. Tenemos que abrir nuestra mente. Tenemos que trabajar con corazón. Eso es mi llamado que hago en todos mis mensajes.
And so, but we cannot stay quiet. We have to rise up. We have to take action. We have to push for change. But we can't just fight, because when we fight, most of the time we lose. We have to find a way to find harmony. We have to open our minds, change our consciousness, and work from our hearts. And this is my message in all the times, all the ways whenever I give a talk, I say we must work from our hearts.
El programa de Cuencas Sagradas es eso, conservar bosque en pie, lo que ya tenemos. No hay para qué más intentar, hay que parar ya. Pero sí buscar otro sistema de desarrollo con una integración total de toda la sociedad.
And so that's why the Sacred Headwaters Initiative is so important. It is really a program to protect, to permanently conserve and protect our standing forest, the remaining standing forest. And there's no more reason why we need to destroy and log and erode this biosphere. We need to work together and find a new economic development model, one that is in harmony with life.
Invitar a la sociedad, a todos los sectores sociales, empresarios, más bien jóvenes, mujeres, vamos a caminar juntos, construyamos un nuevo camino. Nuestro reto, nuestra esperanza está en nosotros.
And so that's why I want to invite you all, invite everyone, invite all of humanity, men, women, young people, from all sectors, to unite, to find a way to find a shared path forward. It's a challenge. I challenge us to really look for a path forward that is for a better future.
También invitar que hagamos esa conexión espiritual. Hay ese vacío del mundo indígena. Por eso hay mucha ambición, mucho ego. No hay solidaridad. Hay una explotación del hombre al hombre. Eso ya hay que dejarlo. Hay que hacer una verdadera integración.
And I also want to call for our connection, our spiritual connection to earth and to each other, that we need to leave behind the ambition, the ego, and the ways that we have brother against brother. We need to find solidarity and come together as full human beings and integrated with nature, and looking for our mutual shared benefit, mutual shared interest.
Invitar a todas las mujeres que están en esta escala, en esta sala, al ministro, que sean nuestro puente, que sean nuestros mensajeros, para que podamos tejer esta alianza.
And I invite all of my fellow panelists, the minister, all of you, to help us build together for the future, to be a bridge for Indigenous people in the front lines, to weave together a better future that is in harmony with nature.
Invitar al mundo empresario, los que tienen mucho dinero, suelten, protejan a la Amazonía, protejamos todos, no solo indígenas, sino entre todos. Esa bioregión amazónica queremos que sea para próxima generación.
And I
Muchas
invite
gracias.
and I invite the wealthy people to also invest in the protection of the biosphere, invest in the protection of the Amazon. We want to leave this incredible biome that has so much diversity for future generations. And we want to protect the future generations of all life. Thank you so much. So I'll just jump in and say it's an honor to have worked with Domingo since 2000. We've been at this work to protect the Amazon. And the work that we're doing now is really based on this indigenous philosophy of the living forest, the living earth paradigm. It's a paradigm. When we see, when you sit with indigenous peoples in this part of the anywhere in the world, really, because I actually had the chance to visit Vanuatu as well when I was with the Christensen Fund and see this common thread where indigenous peoples have this deep connection to all life, that literally everyone is my relative. This idea of kinship ecology, that all species are in some way my relative, and that how I walk in the forest, it's alive. The forest sends me messages. The forest speaks to me. The rivers speak to me. And how I go from village to village and I find my clan, my animal clan or plant clan, and connect with my humanity through the collection of all life. How I see, how indigenous people see that, we live here to be in service to future generations. And as we walk the forest, we are guided by our ancestors and by the unborn generations, and that their voices speak to us every day. That worldview that sees nature as alive, as my relative, is the fundamental basis of the rights of nature and the reason why Ecocide, when we start to see nature as subjects, not as objects, when we see a legal framework that sees nature as beings and not as resources, we will shift the way our values, and that's how we transform our current life-blind economic system to one that is life-seeing. That's our task. We need to create an economic system that sees life, that sees beings. I was having a conversation about biodiversity credits with some negotiators inside the COP, and we were having this philosophical discussion about, well, we need to give nature value. We need to make it an asset on someone's balance sheet so that it has value. And something came to me and I said, at the 1800s, in the United States at least, there was a decision to ban slavery. We went from owning humans and owning their labor to saying, you're actually a free being and you have rights. And yes, you can serve a function like labor. You can provide, labor for the economy. You can build things, you can clean things, you can make things, and we will pay you for your labor as a free being, as a sovereign being, instead of owning you. And in a way, we need to transition our paradigm of the way we see nature from one of ownership, dominion, to one of equal standing. So, in the future of business sector needs to look at how to put nature on the board of directors, how to make sure that nature's voice has guardianship, that every species is represented. And so I've, going from a paradigm shift to then changing the rules. Donella Meadows, a great philosopher that helped influence me, was a systems thinker, and she talked about the biggest change that we can make, the biggest leverage points are to change, to look at the points of leverage in a system, to say, if we change the goals of the system will reorganize with the rules to meet the new goals. And then, so how do we change the goals of the system from wealth accumulation and this thing called development to harmony, to well-being, to the mutual flourishing of all life, including human life? But then she said, but to really change the system, yes, we have to change the system goals. And of course, those will lead to changes in system rules. But ultimately, we have to change the paradigm that created the system. And that is where we are, the indigenous paradigm of a living earth, of nature as alive, as subjects, and then getting down to the work to implement the rights of nature. And you can't have rights of nature unless you make the destruction of nature a crime. You can't enforce the rights of nature unless you make the destruction of nature a crime. So they are the two sides of the same coin. And so our work, one of the things I've had the blessing to do is that I didn't put on my bio, is that I've been a judge for the International Citizens Tribunals on the Rights of Nature. I've had the honor of sitting and hearing cases brought forth by the special earth prosecutors on behalf of different species, mountains, and ecosystems. And as a judge, look at evidence and to write rules and decisions, basically verdicts on how nature's rights were violated. And these are citizens' tribunals, so they're not necessarily, the official courts. But what they're doing is they're helping us as citizens exercise the idea of justice. Citizens help define justice. And, one of the key principles of the rights of nature is that we all, each one of us, no matter which country we're from or which ecosystem we live in, or if we live in Brooklyn or in the Amazon, we have agency to speak for nature anywhere on the planet. That's one of the tenets of the Ecuadorian Constitution. Anyone, anywhere, has agency to defend and speak for the rights of nature anywhere in the world. And so this gives us agency to say, whether you love the frog in your backyard or a species of bird that's going extinct, we are empowered by Gaia, because ultimately Gaia is a superorganism that is the web of life. And if we zoom out far enough, we can see this superorganism 12 kilometers out into space is this membrane of life. And what are we? We as also the web of life are the cells in the body of this living earth. And in your own body, every cell in your own body knows that it has a host. It has a host. And the cell works to keep itself alive while keeping the organism alive. And that's ultimately the consciousness shift that we need to accompany the movement for legal definition, legal action, and practice. Like the Sacred Headwaters is all based on the living earth well-being economy that we're, the idea of mutual flourishing. Humans flourish, ecosystems flourish mutually. And that's the vision of the bioregional plan that we want to implement in the Headwaters. So I'll stop there. Thank you so much. And we've been invited on another panel inside, so we're going to have to run off to the next panel. But it's been a joy to be here. Thank you so much.
Just a huge thank you to both of you for bringing the heart into this room and for the, aligning and showing us the confluence between the rights of nature and ecocide. And there was so much richness in what you've just both said, but just to this idea of moving from life-blind policies to life-seeing policies and action is just something that I think we should all be taking forward with us as we move through these next days. Thank you, both of you. We're all crying. Thank you again to Domingo and to Atossa. Just enormous gratitude and wishing you well in your next intervention. So we're now going to move to hear from our other good friend, Gert-Peter Bruch of Planet Amazon. He's the French director and journalist, photographer, and author who's been committed to the protection of the Amazon rainforest for more than 30 years, and the first international campaign of world-renowned indigenous leader, Chief Raoni, another phenomenal human being. Founder of Planet Amazon, which supports indigenous peoples in their international fight against deforestation. Gert has organized numerous field and awareness campaigns, including 3 international tours with Chief Rowney. Planet Amazon is part of the Alliance of the Guardians of Mother Nature, a movement in favor of peace and future generations, of which Gert is one of the initiators with Chief Rowney and other chiefs of the Brazilian Amazon. Gert's going to explain the importance of ecocide law as a tool and a reframing context for environmental defenders. He sees ecocide law as essential legal protection for the Amazon and its peoples alongside demarcation of indigenous territories. Gert, the floor is yours. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much. It's always very emotional to be with my family, I must say, because when I first heard the word ecocide, well, we knew, we felt what ecocide was before, but when I first heard the word, I was fighting against the Belo Monte Dam. I was helping Chief Rowney to fight against the Belo Monte Dam. And I saw how spontaneously people, when they saw that word ecocide, they linked that to the construction of that dam that would cause ecocide, that would harm Mother Earth, that would harm the rainforest. So I saw that, that the power of that word, before even the power of the project, it was very natural, spontaneous. And so I understood that there was something very powerful here. So when I heard more about the project, I understood it was something important, and I was lucky enough to be able to approach some very important indigenous leader from the Amazon in Brazil, and told them about the project. I didn't have to explain much of it. They understood it very clearly. So I didn't have to advocate for the project for an hour even. So Chief Rowney wanted to support it immediately. He did a video and he understood the importance of the project and this law. And after that, I spoke to many chiefs, and it was the same reaction immediately. We want this law. Yeah. This is important for us. This is exactly what we expect. And they make me understood that it was the tool that they needed to have a much bigger plan, let's say. And the plan that they have, for sure, is protecting the future generations, protecting their people, okay, but protecting future generations. And I really believe so that the Ecocide, recognizing ecocide, is the first step to go much beyond. It's a start. It will be the start. It's the beginning of a new paradigm, like we said. I agree totally with all Atossa said, and I don't need to make more the connection with the laws for nature. But it's exactly that. It's a project that will benefit all of us. And to make the connection to what's happening at the moment in the Amazon, or what has happened recently during the past 4 years, let's say the time that Bolsonaro was at power, is still at power at the moment, so crossing fingers that is going to leave the power soon. But what has happened these 4 years showed us that everything we have constructed together for 30 years was not enough. Many negotiations, many work, many battle led to a protection of a part of the Amazon. We call that the indigenous territories. There's a constitution in Brazil that was adopted in 1988 that recognized the right for indigenous people to have their land demarcated, protected. But all this have been threatened by just one man that came and said, "I don't care. That's not important." And we didn't have anything. We didn't have a tool to stop him, basically. So what happened at this moment when he arrived at power? He just gave a signal to the invaders to invade indigenous territories. And what happened? Do you think that the police came and stop them? Do you think that the indigenous people were protected? They were killed. Their land were invaded. Some villages were burned. The territories, the Amazon, we saw the Amazon burn like never before. So now, it's very clear. I went to visit Chief Raoni in May with Princess Esmeralda. We're doing a film at the moment, and we want to do much more than the film. And we sat with him and said, we're here for two things. Well, we want to help you have your land demarcated, and we'd like to know if you support the Ecocide campaign, because we think that we have to connect both demarcating indigenous territories, like, that's a promise that Lula has made during his campaign, that is going to demarcate all indigenous territories, but we've seen that is not enough. We need a law to protect these territories immediately. And so do you agree? Should we talk about this? He said, of course. Mm-hmm. And then so we met Lula just 2 days after that, and we talked about both subjects and said, so do you agree to... That was a message from Chief Raoni. In fact, he wrote a letter. Mm-hmm. So do you agree to demarcate all indigenous territories? He said, yes, I'm going to do that. And about Ecocide, he didn't respond. Oh. He didn't respond, but we engaged him to hear about the subject and to link both, That doesn't mean that it's going to happen soon. That's why we need you. That's why we need every one of you to push that idea, that word, that concept, that project forward, because that's the only way it's going to happen. And what I can see is that the powerful work that has been done since maybe more than 10 years now, maybe 12 years, and particularly during the time where the foundation was created, 5 years now, is amazing. And it's giving us hope, which is what we need at the moment. And I think that's exactly what the indigenous people from Brazil and from the rest of the Amazon need now. I was told yesterday we had a very important meeting, interesting meeting with activists from Brazil that knows what's happening at the moment with the preparation of the next government. And they told us that every day Lula and his team is discovering what has been destroyed, and it's huge. We can't even imagine what has been destroyed in only 4 years. So we need to reconstruct basically what has been destroyed. It was like 30 years of efforts that have been destroyed while we were, caring about COVID-19 and all other things that was important too. But look now, let's focus again with one of the most important things on the planet. We're talking about biodiversity here. The Amazon is the heart of Mother Earth. We said that it's the lungs of Mother Earth, but it's much more than that, much more than that. It's really the heart of the living world. And we probably going to campaign with Jojo and her team and everyone that is involved with Ecocide next year to link that, to connect that, to really engage the people, to put the question of demarcating indigenous territory in the center of the debate. Because in every Congress that's happening recently, they're not talking about this. They're talking about business. They're talking about carbon offsets. They're talking about economy. They're talking, of course, they're talking about giving money to the indigenous people, but in which way? In which way? Is it a way that will divide them? Probably. So I mean that the first focus, and we know that, is protecting the indigenous territories. That goes with demarcating indigenous territories, and that goes that with going much further than that, having the Ecocide law recognized so that we effectively protect them. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gert, to hear these kind of reports from actually what's happening at high-level policy, and also this idea. I think what's so interesting is the phrase ecocide, as heavy as a word of what it is and what it represents, it makes sense. It translates very easily. And I know within a lot of the work being done across the CBD right now, some of the work in the nature culture space, language is such an important piece of how we communicate with each other. And the fact that a word like ecocide makes sense to a wide range of people, I think is really encouraging as well. And I think the fact that law can be hope is something that's really remarkable, because I think a lot of people think of law as rules and are afraid of law, but actually that's maybe part of the cultural transition that we need to think about. So thank you so much for that. So now we're going to move from the Amazon, and we're going to move into the Arctic, which is kind of how I feel like we're in right now, because I'm cold. Another of the world's vital ecosystems. Our next speaker is Inge Relph, from the executive director and co-founder of Global Choices, a female-led and intergenerational not-for-profit prioritizing protection of the Central Arctic Ocean as the most endangered of our climate systems. She advocates for reframing the ice shield as a global commons, calling for a 10-year moratorium to protect it, as losing the ice is already having major global repercussions, which I think we're all aware. She believes that legal challenges like ecocide will be needed if it is to be protected in time to save this unique biome. Known for thought leadership and policy and innovation around systems change, global governance, and peace and security, Inge was the senior policy advisor to the elders during the landmark Paris COP and the SDG agreements. Prior, she held executive roles in business, founded several international NGOs promoting feminine leadership, and has a lifelong passion for climate justice and human rights. And human rights, by the way, are being centered a lot right now within the CBD. So Inge, the floor is yours. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for the invitation to be here. And isn't it so refreshing to sit on a panel and hear about consciousness, to hear about the inner ecology as much as the outer ecology. And when Sally Rani and I, my co-founder, set up Global Choices, and this is the advantage of having a relatively new organization, we decided we wanted to bring this notion of consciousness into the design of the organization, and that it needed to have a systems lens, but more than anything, it needed to have a lens of consciousness. And I have just literally before this come from our wrap-up meeting, from a network of young women climate leaders that we have created called Arctic Angels. And these are just stellar young women. And I think listening to them is so incredibly hopeful, because it's a completely new paradigm. It's a paradigm that does understand this interconnectedness, that understands the global world, that understands and respects that we are just a little part of nature. And also the way in which, indigenous from Maori indigenous from the Amazon speak with one another and understand and share with others their wisdom. And I have to say, I have a completely new respect for wisdom, because it comes in so many different places. It used to be the idea that it was the elders or the oldies. Actually, there's so much wisdom in these young people. So, and I was just been thinking also about the word unprecedented. How many times have we heard this over this month, right? We're in unprecedented times. And it got me thinking about Charles Dickens, and I'm sure Tale of Two Cities is so familiar, that it's the best of times and the worst of times, and he talks about the light and the dark and about wisdom and foolishness. And I wonder whether that felt unprecedented at that time, and what is different now. I mean, you're talking about 1857 now. But I do think it is different now, because we are literally facing extinctions of whole systems. And I didn't in my wildest dreams think that I would be advocating to protect the Arctic. I mean, I like penguins, I like polar bears, but, it was up there somewhere, frozen, wasn't it? But when you take a systems lens and a risk perspective to this, you begin to realize that if we lose this system, there is no recovery. And our strapline is, you can't plant ice. And the global consequences are monumental. We're already beginning to feel it. But wait until we have this massive variability of climate stability, and you have food insecurity, and then you've got people on the move, and then you have the instability and conflict that comes from that. So I think it's of course the biggest differentiator here is time. And we did actually at COP a wonderful session on the Arctic, the Amazon, and Africa, because Africa, for instance, is suffering currently. The biodiversity in Africa and the amount of animals that have been dying because of the heat waves. So you get the picture. But the point is this one of time, and looking at what we have and the way legal systems don't serve us, not even currently, let alone future fit. So taking the Arctic, you've got the UN Law of the Sea as the overall law, but you also have these contradictions, and it is a real mishmash of laws. So you've got the Deep Sea Mining Authority giving licensing, you've got the Intercontinental Shelf authorities licensing, and all competing with one another. We've got the BBNJ, the biodiversity update of the UN Law of the Sea, which, we haven't been able to get over the line yet. So, and all of this takes forever. If we wait for a treaty to protect the Central Arctic Ocean, it will be melted by the time we do it. So our proposal, and of course this is why we want something like Ecocide, because it's something that is there and real and cohesive. And I do think that there will be a time when we will look back and say, yes, of course, why didn't we have this earlier? It's going to happen. But in the meantime, we're calling for a 10-year moratorium, just to protect and give a precautionary principle pause, to give nature a reprieve, and also to protect from, the day one said, business as usual. It's all planned. Let's have some deep seabed mining. Why not have a transpolar shipping route through there? Why not, disregard the 21,000 unique species and the fact that we actually know more about the moon than we do about what's under that sea, under that ice. So, I can see, if only we had Ecocide, how much easier it would be, because I think it has also very real resonance in boardrooms. If there's criminal accountability for what you do have to think very differently, and similarly for states. So I do. I totally think that we have to be creative. We also have to have legal systems that are preemptive and that are future fit, because currently, we tend to be. It's a bit like sort of wine in the old, in new wine in old skins. We're trying to make it fit, and it doesn't work. So we are in unprecedented times, and that includes the legal system needing to have really unprecedented imaginative thinking. And I want to pay tribute to you, because here we are trying to do similar things in terms of getting states like Vanuatu, to have a voice in this, because as global commons, yes, the Sami would be affected, but Vanuatu, Samoa, underwater. So why should they not have a say in these global commons? And we have no global governance to speak of. So can we create systems that actually really give voice to those who are most affected, and that are inclusive, and that does reflect the whole system's nature of things? And from watching the way you've gone about it, there's so many wonderful lessons to be had and to be shared about how we can work in collaboration, but also in the slipstream of what you're achieving. So salute for all the work that you've done. And we will get there, and we will say, why haven't we had this sooner?
Thank you so much, Inge. That was very incredibly wise words. I think there's a lot of wisdom in this room, and you were mentioning, the elders and the youth and the Arctic angels, and I've been seeing this confluence as well, where I feel like we now have youth advocating for what our elders have been teaching us for time immemorial, and I think we are starting to kind of reach hands around the other side, and things are finally connecting through, and so it's really your work is beautiful, and it's just wonderful to hear how you're maneuvering and the wisdom you're bringing in the way that you're maneuvering, and to bring the Arctic into the room beyond the cold, which is a perfect segue in terms of the youth piece to bring back Amalie into the space. As I guess, presumably many of you have been inside, and the youth are everywhere. And by, every day I kind of I have been running by the youth pavilion just to get a youth injection, because it's really like, it's not even youth serum, it's just an injection of hope and joy. And I don't care how old I am or what my hair looks like or how many gray hairs I have. I'm just like, bring me your love, because these guys are on it. I mean, they're really just leading the path, and it's an absolute joy to have so many young people running around this global conference. And I think the youth and climate movement, youth climate and biodiversity movement, has increasingly been really generated and speaking on behalf of Ecocide law, and trying to push it into the policy level as well. So we're here today to hear a little bit more from you, Amalie, about what you've been doing here in Canada, and how you've been taking Stop Ecocide on as an initiative that you're embracing. So if you could just talk to us a little bit more. Well, I suppose you're now an ambassador and communications director of Stop Ecocide Canada, and you founded Stop Ecocide Toronto, and became the co-lead of Stop Ecocide's Global Youth for Ecocide Law Network. So you're building the movement here, it sounds like. Lucky Jojo. And I'll just finish introducing you, but outside the Stop Ecocide movement, Amalie is an undergraduate student at the University of Toronto, double majoring in international relations and peace, conflict and justice studies. My goodness, okay. And you're currently working with the global research team that examines the social and ecological implications of lithium extraction for clean energy transition. And you're passionate, clearly, about environmental justice and the youth voice from the global to the grassroots. So can you tell us a little bit about why this legal initiative is so important to young people? Thank you.
Yeah. So it's phenomenal to be on such an amazing panel with such articulate and just passionate and powerful people. I give these descriptors because these are things that come without titles, but just in people's energies and their ways of speaking and relating to one another. They're things that people can bring to a movement no matter what your background is. One of the ways that youth are often tokenized and closed out of environmental discussions is that we don't often have huge lists of degrees to show for ourselves. We don't often have fancy titles and long resumes to say, hey, this is why you need to listen to us. But we do bring passion. We bring a drive for change. And I think we bring a really unique kind of experience that's often not valued as much as it should be. Youth today are one of the first generations to genuinely wake up and not know where they're going to go to school, not know what job they're going to take, not because they simply haven't made that decision yet, but because we don't know what parts of the planet are going to be livable. We're living through a period of mass extinction and a period of mass climate breakdown, and that's terrifying. I can't number the amount of youth I've met who suffer extreme climate anxiety, who are paralyzed by fear of what our world is going to look like by the time we are able to have long lists of degrees and long resumes. By the time we're led into boardrooms and government offices, we may not have the same places where those government offices and boardrooms are today because simply they will have to be relocated because of climate and environmental disaster. And so the reason youth are so important on these kind of panels is because we bring a very raw and a very different kind of experience to the table. In the Stop Ecocide movement in particular, I've been speaking to youth a lot over the past couple months just about ecocide law in a very broad context, So our Toronto team and our Canadian team launched an open letter from Canadian youth to our government asking for a law against ecocide. And that means we've been talking to a lot of people on the street about what their opinion is and telling them about the movement. And I experienced something very, very similar to what Gert said, where people would immediately say, yes, this is needed. This is absolutely needed. But the most common question I got was, why doesn't this already exist? Why is this not something that is illegal? The worst kinds of environmental destruction are simply not sustainable if we are going to be able to have children, if my generation is going to be one that does have kids. And it's something that seems so intuitive, but it's also seen as quite radical by a lot of people, changing our legal systems, changing the laws on which we rely. And it's something that's mobilized a lot of youth who weren't involved in environmental advocacy before they learned about ecocide law. So a lot of our Toronto grassroots chapter are people who were not called to climate justice before it. And I've asked them why Stop Ecocide really related to them and really reached out to them. And it's because it's something tangible. It's one thing. It's one law that can be implemented to make change. So often we have shifting targets and we have governments who will say one thing and then change the goal a year later or when the government shifts. Ecocide law is something really tangible that we can track. And as Jojo said, it's a game changer. It is one thing that will just remake the way we relate to nature. And I think that's something that gives people a lot of hope. So the global youth movement towards ecocide law has been growing for a while, and it really launched around Stockholm Plus 50, the conference where global youth put out a position statement and included a call for ecocide law in that statement. In other youth statements, like the COI conferences of youth around the UNFCCC, have also called for ecocide law. So in the output document from COI 16 and from COI 17, ecocide was included in those. And it's been a really important mobilizing point. We saw really recently at the Fridays for Future marches on September 23rd that in New York City, there were 4 key demands. One of those demands was ecocide law, and it's continuing to be pushed forward by these grassroots youth movements. We will continue to mobilize until this is a law because it's one thing that gives young people a lot of hope. And right now, it's really scary to be a young person in this world. We cannot continue to get locked out of intergenerational discussions. And I think what we need to do that is to abandon this reliance on titles to actually have a say in the dialogue. We need to see that young people are able to contribute to the discussion with passion, with creativity, and with hope. Ecocide law is a source of hope for so many people. And for that reason, I want to read you guys a couple quotes that young people have shared with me when I've been talking to them about ecocide law, to just really bring in context other than myself of what people have been saying. So Amy Mann, who is at the University of Toronto and is one of the most amazing climate activists I've been able to meet, said, "My livelihood, my knowledge, and sense of self comes from my connection to the land. Without it, there is no future for me." Ginger Ozeki, who is a Fridays for Future activist and who has been really influential in bringing forward the Stop Ecocide campaign in Canada, said, "I signed this letter because as a 15-year-old, the only true fear I have is the death of our Mother Earth." Another youth from BC said, "I would like to make it to 50. A student at the University of Toronto said, "Establishing international legal meaning to the crime of ecological degradation could provide the necessary push for Canada to enact substantive change." One youth responded when we asked why they signed the open letter with one word. That word was survival. Another youth said, "We are living through a mass extinction event. The environment and animals that are essential for the health of the planet are at risk. Our future and that of our environment are forever interlinked, and the destruction of our planet shall pay its dividends in the form of the untold suffering of today's youth, our children, and all future generations." Young people want change, and it's urgent, because we have everything to lose. We have our future to lose. So we're asking all generations to join us, because together, we will continue to fight for ecocide law. We will continue to fight for intergenerational climate justice. And the only way we have hope is through community, through coming together and supporting each other and listening to youth as equal partners in this search for an ecocide law.
What was I saying about being emotional? I mean, I didn't know Ecocide law was going to make us cry all the time. Oof. Yeah, thank you for speaking from your heart, and for bringing that to the table. And I'm kind of speechless, so I'm not going to try to come back with much right now. But I'm taking everything that you said to heart, and I think we all are. And we need to do better. And I think Ecocide law really is, as you say, again, reiterating what Gert said, it's providing hope. And that is something that we need to take into account, because it's actually the thing that can create accountability, which is missing from so many of these pledges and these frameworks and everything that we're all trying to do together. So, okay, Jojo, we got a lot more work to do. We're going to do this, right? Thank you. So now we're going to move to the third region of the world, already deeply affected by the global climate crisis, and welcome our esteemed co-host, the Honorable Minister Relph Regenvanu of Vanuatu in the Pacific. The Minister is our final speaker and will conclude our presentations today with the position of the Republic of Vanuatu. He's also, of course, warmly invited to give his own personal reflections on the interventions of what we've just heard, if you're willing to do so. But before I hand you the floor, I'd like to note that his full title gives us a sense of what Vanuatu and other great ocean states are already facing. Mr. Regenvanu's official portfolio is Minister of Climate Change Adaptation, Meteorology and Geohazards, Energy, Environment, and Disaster Risk Management for his country. The Republic of Vanuatu, as that title indicates, has been at the front line of the dangers and impacts of the global crisis. This courageous small state is also a global leader in diplomatic discussions regarding recognition of ecocide as a crime at the ICC and as well as other legal avenues. Minister, thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you all for being here as well, and thank you for being able to host this event with the Stop Ecocide Foundation. Vanuatu is one of the first countries to call upon the International Criminal Court to recognize ecocide as a crime. And the good thing is there are many more states now. And as Jojo said, especially after the legal definition came out, which really helped states to be able to get on board with and be much more clearer about what ecocide means. I think Vanuatu has been taking this position because, according to the United Nations, we are the country most at risk from natural disasters in the world, 5 years running now. So that's an indication of the extent of the impacts of climate change in terms of the increased intensity of natural hazards that we're facing, as well as it reflects also the level of so-called development of the country, very low level of development according to GDP statistics. And that combined gives us that vulnerability that forces us to go out to the rest of the world, because we didn't create this problem, but we're suffering from it the most in terms of global emissions. And I would say, the increase in global emissions causing climate change is, for us, the number one ecocide. I mean, alongside, what we hear about from the Amazon, which also happens in our region, in West Papua region, is one of the huge areas of deforestation in the world, in the island of New Guinea. Also, Vanuatu, like many Pacific Island states, we are mostly indigenous people. And in my country, over 90% of the territory is owned and managed by the indigenous people under the Constitution. It's not the state or anyone else. And that land cannot be sold. It has to be leased. It can't be sold. It's in perpetuity under the control of indigenous people according to customary law. That's what the Constitution says. And that's a similar situation in many Pacific Island countries. So this gives you some background as to why Vanuatu was very quick to jump on this and recognize this concept and this term because, as we're hearing from our youth delegate and the others, these are really issues of survival for our people. And this idea of having somewhere to live is really right at the forefront of my government's almost every actions and budget now is all about making sure people are safe and have somewhere to live safely. And it's become a preoccupation. So Ecocide, of course, comes in at that international law level where states can interact. And states will be the ones who will have to make that change. And so on Ecocide, for example, there will be a meeting here. I'm meeting the Belgian Minister of the Environment tomorrow. And there'll be a movement here to set up a coalition of states. There's now enough states that we can set up a coalition to push for the recognition of the crime of ecocide within the International Criminal Court, within the Rome Statute. And I believe that coalition we will aim for next year, towards the end of next year, to have that process started so that the amendment can be developed that will result in a change to that charter, which includes this line. And it's a long process, and as everyone says, we're way too late. But at least it's happening now. I also want to talk about some of the other initiatives at that level that some of us states are pushing. And one that Vanuatu has been at the forefront of also is seeking an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on the legal consequences of the effects of climate change on human rights. And this comes about because all nations in the world have signed up to these international conventions, right? We've signed up to the UN Charter. We've signed up to the Convention on Social and Political Rights, Civil Rights. We've signed up to Convention on Biological Diversity, the Paris Agreement. We've all made these commitments, and what we're finding is that states are not honoring those commitments at all. We're hearing about all these laws being broken, right? At the international level, it's the same thing. States are not doing what they said they would do. And it's very frustrating for countries like Vanuatu and many of the smaller, most vulnerable countries who are doing more than they should in a situation in which we are not responsible for the problem. But we are still doing more than those responsible for the problem are doing, despite the fact that they committed to doing something about it. And so for that fact, we're going to the International Court of Justice to ask for an advisory opinion on what are states' obligations when they sign these agreements. They have signed it, they've committed to it. And if they don't do it, what are their obligations and what are the legal consequences on the human rights of our populations? So in that context, we're talking about humans, right? But we're also talking about the environment, because it's put in that question, in that advisory opinion, effect on the environment as well. Another initiative that I want to talk about that Vanuatu is also a part of is that just last week, in fact, the Commission, it's called COSIS, C-O-S-I-S. It's the Commission of Small Island States on Climate Change and International Law. We submitted a request for an advisory opinion from the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea on the same question. What is the obligations of states who've signed up to the UN clause, the Convention of the Law of the Sea, which says you will not cause transboundary harm to the ocean of another state? Now it's happening with a rise in sea temperature. So what are the legal obligations and consequences that these states have to face that signed up to this agreement and are not honouring it? And so these are initiatives that are in the same kind of space as this one of Ecocide, is trying to push international law. And to do that, we need states to work together. And I'm glad to say that more and more states, like for example on the International Court of Justice advisory opinion, we expect that was released for all UN states to look at about 2 weeks ago on the 29th of November. The vote will be coming up in the next couple of months. Already we have a simple majority of states, which is like 96, 97, who are going to vote for it. And once they vote for it in the General Assembly, it'll be sent up to the ICJ for an advisory opinion. And that will take another couple of years before we get that opinion, similar to the one that's gone to the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea, similar to this one. Once it's put on the agenda, then there'll have to be more work done But we see, I think we're seeing a recognition way too late, but that's always how it happens. That's always, unfortunately, how humans change is there has to be a massive calamity and then they change. We're starting to see that change among states. And hopefully, at that level, we can see the ecocide recognized and put on the statutes and then start to be implemented in domestic legislations and elsewhere. Belgium is leading. They have it in their domestic legislation already, ecocide. So they've really shown an example that we all hope to learn from. And we also look forward to getting more legal clarity on, what are states' obligations on all of these fronts when they sign up to things. Thank you.
Do we have a hard close? Thank you. Right. First of all, thank you so much for that reflection on the state of your country, where bringing us to the Pacific Islands, to really showing us how much harm is being done, how much you're having to bear the burden of and brunt of the effects of climate change, and the lack of attention on what you're doing. And it's just so important for us to be presencing ourselves with this kind of wider knowledge of what's happening in the Pacific Islands, as well as the Arctic and the Amazon. So we've really traversed the globe this afternoon. We very much appreciate the remarks and for you doing the heavy lifting that you've been doing over in Vanuatu. And I don't know, I always feel like I need to apologize on behalf of humanity when I host these things. And I don't know that that's my job or role, because it certainly isn't, but I always feel the need to, because I always find myself in these places of privilege thinking, what on God's name are we actually doing? And how are we going to change? And we can't just continue failing our way to success. We need to do far better than that. So you have my heart and my pledge to do whatever I can in my own little way and keep stitching and sewing as many seeds together that we can try to do better. I don't know if we have a hard close. I don't know if there are burning questions. We do. Okay. We've what? So we have a hard close. We've got 2 minutes. Are there any burning questions that we can answer very quickly, or shall we just leave it there?
I'd love to come back on a couple of.
You would like to come back? Okay, Jojo wants to reply.
No, I just wanted to come back on a couple of the things that the Minister brought up. I mean, I think one of the reasons that ecocide law is such an important ingredient in the change and move forward is precisely because of this very human thing that we don't change unless we have to. There's this sense, we're creatures of habit. We don't change our habits unless something makes us do so, whether that's external circumstances or, obviously with ecocide law, a change in the rules. And so in a way, what we're sort of aiming to do here is bring forward or accelerate something that is going to have to happen, but actually to try and get something in place before it's so even later, and we've lost islands, we've lost forests, we've lost so much. So, and I think the other thing to say, to end on a note of hope, is that what we are seeing, which is really fascinating and inspiring, is that even before this law is in place, we're already seeing it having quite far-reaching effects. And I just mentioned briefly that the UN Race to Zero climate champions, which are all about corporate voluntary activity around action on climate and so on, their latest report was basically admitting that voluntary action doesn't work fast enough by a long, long degree, and that policy and regulation are needed. And they did a whole section on ecocide law in that report, describing it as a driver and influencer of change. And it's not in place yet. And that's incredible. And so those kinds of conversations are hugely important and hugely encouraging, because the more we talk about it and the more that these states are beginning to speak with each other, as Minister Regenvanu has said, the more the influence on decision-making actually out there in the world actually becomes concrete. So that's really encouraging. So I'd love to end there.
Thank you for the positive note. And thank you, Minister, Amalie, Inge, Gert, Jojo, Atossa, and Domingo. for this absolutely beautiful, rich, deep, harrowing, complicated, but such an important conversation. I think we all know what we need to do. We need to keep pushing, and we need to keep using this word everywhere we go so that we can keep infiltrating everywhere we go. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you all to your panel.